She woke up from a coma, and what she discovered was enough to send her into a deadly rage. Could the betrayal of a 28-year marriage drive a woman to kill? In this shocking case, the truth is even darker than you can imagine. Stay tuned to uncover what happened. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment your theories below as we unravel this chilling mystery. The morning was still, too still for someone to wake up from the kind of coma Helen had been in for weeks. The world she had known was now shattered, fractured into pieces by an unexpected betrayal so vile it could break anyone. For months, her life had been marked by a tragedy she couldn't quite understand. A devastating accident that stole her from the world she knew, from the life she thought she had built with the man she had spent decades beside. But when her eyes opened, and she tried to make sense of the reality she found herself in, she would discover something that changed everything. It wasn't the hospital room that felt foreign to her, though that was a world in itself. It was the thought that this man, the one who had vowed to cherish and protect her, had betrayed her in the most unforgivable way. The betrayal wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. No, it was a plan, a scheme that had unfolded while she lay in the dark, fighting for her life. The man she had trusted, the one she had built a home and family with, had been hiding secrets. And these secrets weren't just whispers from the past. They were fresh, alive, and now in front of her. There were no more questions, no more uncertainties. The truth had risen from the ashes like a cold, uncaring monster. Helen could feel the weight of it pressing down on her chest as she scrolled through the messages, her heart breaking with each word she read. He hadn't just been unfaithful once, no, he had lied, cheated, and played with her trust as if it meant nothing at all. There, in black and white, the affair he had carried on for months, the woman who had replaced her in ways she never imagined, and the cruel laughter that had tainted every promise he had made. She had been too trusting, too hopeful that the man she loved still existed beneath the surface. But now, it was clear, there was nothing left of that man. She wasn't even sure how long she had been awake, how long she had been grappling with the nightmare she had just uncovered. But one thing was undeniable, she wasn't the same woman who had gone into that coma. The anger that had been simmering inside her, waiting to escape, began to take shape. It wasn't rage. It was colder, something more calculated. She had been through too much, been betrayed in ways no one should ever endure. She wasn't going to let it slide, not this time. Helen's mind raced as she pieced together the extent of the deception. The images, the texts, the phone calls, they all confirmed it. And there were no excuses. No apologies that could undo the damage. How could there be? How could he pretend nothing had changed when everything between them had been a lie? Her head throbbed as the pain of her betrayal deepened, her heart cracking under the weight of it. Helen's mind raced with thoughts of what she would do when he returned. What would she say? How would she make him understand the depth of her pain? Would words even matter anymore? Helen lay there in the sterile, white hospital room, her body still aching from the trauma, but her mind was sharp, every thought clear and vivid. The betrayal she had uncovered twisted inside her like a poisonous vine, crawling through her veins, tightening its grip with every passing moment. She could feel the coldness of it, the sharp sting of deception, and the anger simmering beneath her skin. For months, he had hidden this from her, living a double life while she lay unconscious, unaware of the world that had been unfolding around her. It wasn't just the affair that broke her, it was everything that came with it. The lies. The manipulation. The time he had spent with someone else while she fought for her life. The woman in the photos, the ones she had seen in his phone, looked so different from her. Younger. More carefree. She couldn't help but wonder how long it had been going on, how deep the deception ran. The betrayal wasn't just physical, it was emotional, psychological. The room felt suffocating now, the bright overhead lights casting harsh shadows across the walls. It was as if the world had stopped, and in that silence, Helen's mind raced. Her husband, Ronald, had been her rock, her partner. But now? Now, he was a stranger. She could barely recognize the man in the photos she had seen, the man who had been so kind and loving for all those years. The one who had promised her forever. But forever had ended in an instant, replaced by secrets, lies, and a relationship that was shattered beyond repair. Her thoughts turned cold. She wasn't going to forgive him. She wasn't going to pretend that everything would be okay, that they could just move on from this like it was nothing. No. This was unforgivable. The weight of the betrayal hung heavy on her chest, but beneath that weight was something else, something darker, something that urged her to take control. Ronald didn't know what was coming. She could feel it in her bones. The man who had betrayed her so thoroughly would soon have to answer for his actions. She wasn't the kind of woman who sought vengeance, but this wasn't about vengeance. This was about justice. Her justice. The justice that had been denied to her for so long. The more she thought about it, the more the plan formed in her mind. It wasn't about hurting him. It wasn't about making him suffer in the way he had made her suffer. It was about him understanding. Understanding the gravity of what he had done, the pain he had caused. As the hours passed, Helen's thoughts grew more focused. Her anger, the pain, and the betrayal had all fused into a singular purpose, to make him understand, to make him regret ever crossing her. The hospital room felt smaller now, the walls closing in around her, but she no longer cared. The anger was no longer consuming her, it was propelling her forward. The woman who had woken up in that bed was gone. She had been replaced by someone more determined, more resolute. When Ronald came to see her, the mask he wore was too familiar. He was playing the part of the loving husband, the man who cared, the man who would do anything to make things right. But she could see through it now. His apologies were empty, his words hollow. She didn't need to hear his excuses, his lies about how it was a mistake, how it would never happen again. She knew better. She had seen the evidence, felt the weight of the betrayal with every second of her recovery. She didn't need his words. What she needed was his acknowledgement. His understanding that what he had done was unforgivable. Ronald's visit lasted only a few minutes, but it felt like an eternity. His voice was soft, filled with regret. "Helen, I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. You have to believe me. I love you, and I was stupid. Please forgive me." Helen didn't respond. She didn't even move. She just stared at him, her eyes cold, unblinking. She saw the man she had loved for so many years, but she didn't recognize him anymore. "I'm done," she finally said, her voice barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of everything she had been feeling. She had made her decision. There was no going back. Ronald's face faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. He reached for her hand, but she pulled it away. He looked at her, confused, as if he couldn't understand what was happening. But the truth was, he would never understand. He didn't deserve to. The next few days were a blur for Helen. The anger she had felt, the pain, had faded into something else, a cold, calculated resolve. She didn't care about the man who had left her for another woman. She didn't care about the years they had spent together. All that mattered now was what she had to do to make him understand the weight of his betrayal. She could feel the pieces of her plan falling into place. She wasn't going to make him suffer for the sake of it. No, she was going to make him realize just how deeply he had hurt her. When he came to see her again, he would finally see that Helen was no longer the woman he could manipulate, the woman he could lie to. She had become something else. And he would pay the price for his actions. The days leading up to Ronald's next visit were agonizing for Helen. But not in the way one might think. She wasn't anxious. She wasn't unsure. The anger, the betrayal, had been replaced with a sense of absolute clarity. She spent hours in the small hospital room, staring out of the window, watching as the world outside moved on without her. It was a slow and deliberate march of life, and yet it felt like everything had stopped for her. When Ronald entered her room a few days later, it was as though time had stopped. The door creaked open with a familiar sound, but Helen barely acknowledged it. She kept her gaze fixed on the hospital bed in front of her, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She could hear the soft shuffle of his shoes on the linoleum floor, the hesitant, almost unsure steps of a man who had no idea what was coming. "Hey, Helen," he said softly, his voice strained but warm, as if he still thought that the same old words would somehow undo the damage he had done. Helen didn't respond immediately. She just let the silence hang in the air between them, thick and heavy. The room, though filled with the hum of medical equipment, felt suffocating to both of them. "How are you feeling?" he asked, his words lingering in the air like an echo. Helen's heart didn't race when she heard him. Instead, it was a dull thud, almost like the beat of a drum marking the beginning of a countdown. "I'm better," she finally replied, her voice low, steady. The calmness of it all almost felt foreign. She could feel the layers of her previous self being peeled away, each word she spoke another step in her transformation. Ronald seemed relieved. "That's good to hear. I'm so sorry about everything, Helen. You have to know that I never meant to hurt you." Helen turned to look at him, and for the first time in days, she locked eyes with him. There was no softness in her gaze, no longing, no trace of the love she once felt. "You're sorry." Helen's voice cracked just slightly, a sharp, biting edge to it. "You're sorry, Ronald. After everything? After you've destroyed everything we built? After you left me to die alone while you were off with her?" Her chest tightened just a bit, but she held it in. She couldn't let herself fall into the trap of his sympathy. "How long were you seeing her, Ronald? How long did you think I wouldn't find out?" Ronald took a step closer, his face crumpling with emotion. "It was a mistake, Helen. I was confused. It didn't mean anything." "It didn't mean anything," she repeated, her voice rising now, the anger bubbling to the surface. "You don't get to do that. You don't get to cheat on me and pretend it was a mistake." Her breath hitched as she fought to maintain control. She wasn't going to let him manipulate her again. Ronald stepped forward, reaching for her hand as though the gesture would somehow redeem him, but Helen pulled it away, her movement swift and deliberate. She stood up now, her body still weak from the coma, but there was a newfound strength in her movements. Her heart was steady. Her mind was clear. "I trusted you," she said, her voice low but firm. "I loved you. And this is what you did to me." She turned her back on him and walked slowly toward the window. "I'm done with your lies, Ronald. I've been done for a while now." For a long moment, there was silence between them. Ronald stood frozen, uncertain of how to fix things. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. He knew the truth now. Helen wasn't going to forgive him. There would be no more second chances. This was the end. But Helen knew that Ronald still didn't understand the gravity of what he had done. He had never taken her seriously. He had always thought he could manipulate his way out of it, charm her back, beg her for forgiveness, and she would let him back in. That wasn't going to happen this time. Helen turned to face him again. She could see the desperation in his eyes now, the realization that he had truly lost her. "Helen," he began again, his voice trembling now, "please, I never wanted to hurt you. You have to believe me." His hands reached out, trembling, but he stopped halfway, as though he had suddenly realized that his touch was no longer welcome. Helen shook her head slowly. "You never wanted to hurt me. You never wanted to hurt me." Her voice broke through the air, sharp, slicing through the tension. "You think this is just about you, don't you? About your guilt, your regret, your pathetic attempt at trying to make things right. But it's not. It's not about that. This is about what you did to me. What you did to us." Ronald could feel his pulse quicken as the distance between them closed, as though he were moving closer to the inevitable. She looked down at the sheets, her hands gently gripping the edge of them as though finding some small piece of comfort in their texture. But her mind was elsewhere. She could feel the weight of the decisions she had made in the last few days. She could still hear the sound of the ticking clock in her room, marking each moment, reminding her that time was running out. There was no going back. For the first time since she had woken up, Helen felt a sense of calm. The overwhelming anger, the confusion, the pain, they had all faded. In their place was a quiet strength that she hadn't known she possessed. "Ronald, you think you can just waltz back into my life because you feel bad? Because you're scared?" She let out a bitter laugh, but there was no humor in it. "You don't get to fix this. You never could. You've lost me. And now, you're going to lose everything else." Ronald's face contorted, a mixture of fear and confusion. "What are you talking about? What do you mean, lose everything else?" Helen didn't answer right away. Instead, she walked over to the small nightstand by her bed, where a few personal items had been placed, a photo frame, a water bottle, some medications. But it was what lay beneath the photo frame that caught her attention. A small envelope. The envelope. It had been there for a few days now, but she hadn't dared to look inside until now. She picked it up slowly, her fingers trembling only slightly as she slid it open. Inside, she pulled out a stack of papers, documents, photographs, evidence she had gathered over the past week. Every last detail. Every last betrayal. She knew that Ronald didn't even realize what she had uncovered. He hadn't known that she had been quietly planning her move while he thought she was recovering from her coma. The hospital staff had no idea how quickly her mind had recovered, how far ahead she had thought. She laid the papers down on the bed, one by one. Divorce papers. Financial records. Photos of Ronald and his mistress, the woman he had thought he could hide from Helen. "You think I didn't know?" she asked, her voice steady. "I've known for a long time, Ronald. I just didn't know how to get out. I didn't know how to leave someone I had given everything to. But I've seen the truth now. And I won't let you lie to me anymore." Ronald's face drained of color as he looked down at the documents, at the photos, his world crumbling in front of him. His hands shook violently now, his voice barely a whisper. "Helen, please, But she cut him off, her voice sharp and final. "You've already said enough. You've already done enough." The weight of the words hung in the air like a death sentence. Ronald knew this was the end. There was no forgiveness. There would be no second chances. Helen had made up her mind, and there was no going back. She moved closer now, her eyes locked on him, as if searing the image of his face into her memory. "You thought you could get away with it. You thought that because I was weak, because I was in a coma, that I wouldn't know. But I know everything. Every lie, every betrayal." Her voice dropped to a low whisper now, almost as if she were speaking to herself. "And now you're going to pay." Ronald tried to step back, his hands up in a pleading gesture, but there was nowhere for him to go. He had no escape. Ronald stood there, broken, helpless, unable to do anything but watch her walk away. The reality of what he had lost, what he had destroyed, was just beginning to hit him. But it was too late now. Helen was done with him. And there was nothing he could say to undo what he had done. The damage had been done, and now, there was no going back. As Helen walked away, the sound of her footsteps echoed in the quiet room, each step growing fainter as she moved farther away from Ronald. The air felt thick now, like something in the room had shifted irrevocably. Ronald stood frozen, his body rigid with the weight of the truth that he could no longer escape. His mind raced, but no words would form in his mouth. He had made choices. He had broken vows. And now, he was paying the ultimate price. Helen moved slowly to the window, her hands still gripping the edge of the envelope. She glanced outside, though her eyes were not truly focused on the view. Her mind was still racing, cycling through everything she had uncovered. The lies, the deceit, the years she had wasted trusting someone who had never deserved her trust. Helen, I know I've made mistakes, he said, his voice cracking, but I never meant to hurt you. Please, give me a chance to make things right. I've been a fool, but I swear I'll change. I can't lose you. Helen's gaze didn't waver. Her eyes locked onto him, cold and unyielding, as she took a deep breath, steadying herself for the final confrontation. She could feel her pulse quickening, the tension in her chest rising. No, she said, her voice firm, steady, yet laced with an underlying pain that Ronald could not understand. You don't get to do this. You don't get to break me and then expect me to pick up the pieces for you. I'm sorry, he whispered, barely audible, his voice breaking. Helen's eyes softened for a brief moment, but only for a second. No, she repeated, her voice quieter now, almost to herself. You're not sorry. If you were, you wouldn't have done it. If you were, you wouldn't have hurt me. And it's not just me, Ronald. It's us. Ronald's voice trembled as he called out to her once more. Helen, please, But she didn't respond. She didn't have to. The truth was already settled in her mind. She knew what had to be done. Helen turned back to face him, her face set in a grim expression. There was no pity in her eyes, no compassion, only the cold certainty of a woman who had been wronged for far too long. I have everything, she said quietly. The proof. The truth. Everything. Ronald's eyes widened, and for the first time, he truly understood. The panic set in. He had thought he could hide, thought he could outwit her, thought he could continue living in his world of lies. But Helen had seen through it all. She had pieced everything together, every document, every conversation, every whisper he thought he had gotten away with. I don't know what you mean, Ronald stammered, his voice growing weaker with each passing second. Helen smiled, though it wasn't a smile of warmth. I mean, I know everything, Ronald. I know about your affair. I know about the money you've hidden. I know about the lies you've told, the promises you've broken, the love you've destroyed. Outside, the night had fallen, casting a dark blanket over the city. The streets were quieter now, the last remnants of the day's hustle fading into the distance. But Ronald's eyes were wide, darting from one corner to the next, searching for her, for any sign that she was nearby. His hands gripped the papers in his pocket tightly, but the cold air felt sharp against his skin, a reminder that time was running out. He reached his car, his fingers fumbling with the keys, the tremors in his hands betraying his panic. He didn't even think about where he was going, didn't care about the consequences. He just needed to find her. He needed to fix this. Helen was gone. But what if she was just getting started? What if the worst was yet to come? The street seemed endless as he drove through the city, his eyes scanning every face, every person who passed by, hoping to see her, hoping to stop her before it was too late. His thoughts were spiraling, twisting in all directions. What could she be planning? What if she was going to expose everything to the authorities? What if she had already contacted someone? He couldn't let that happen. He had to get to her. Meanwhile, Helen was far from the fragile woman Ronald thought he had left behind. She was already several steps ahead of him, far beyond anything he could have imagined. As she walked through the darkened streets, the weight of everything she had done settled on her like armor. The night was hers now. It was a new chapter, a new beginning. And she had every intention of finishing it her way. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking the stillness of the night. She pulled it out and checked the message. It was from a private number, someone she had been in contact with for the past few days, someone who had promised to help her see this through. The message was simple, but it made her heart race with a mix of anticipation and cold certainty. It's time. Helen didn't need to read the message twice. She already knew what it meant. It was done. And now, everything Ronald had worked so hard to keep hidden was about to come crashing down. She wasn't just walking away from her past. She was taking control of her future. And there was no turning back now. The night had fallen like a shroud over the city, the streets quiet, save for the occasional echo of distant sirens. Helen sat alone in her apartment, the papers she had once held so tightly now scattered across the table before her. The weight of the decision had never been more suffocating. It was one thing to know the truth, to feel the searing betrayal in her bones, but it was another entirely to take the final step. She had spent hours in the hospital room, listening to Ronald's futile pleas, hearing him beg for forgiveness, and yet, none of it had mattered. He had shown her nothing but contempt, and his words were nothing more than a desperate attempt to salvage his crumbling world. Helen's mind was clear now. The rage she had carried for so long had dulled, replaced by a quiet, almost eerie calm. The car ride to Ronald's house was silent, the engine humming steadily beneath her. Helen's eyes remained fixed on the road ahead, her thoughts distant. This was it. The end of it all. She had thought long and hard about what she was going to do, but in truth, she knew there was no other option. Not anymore. Ronald had become a threat to her existence, to the life she had left to live. And as she sat there, gripping the steering wheel with white-knuckled hands, she knew there was only one way to end this, completely. When she arrived at his house, she didn't hesitate. She parked the car, slipped out into the night, and made her way toward the front door. Her heart pounded in her chest, but there was no fear, only a relentless determination. She had come too far to back out now. The house was dark, save for a dim light flickering in the kitchen. She knew he'd be there, alone. She had learned the hard way that Ronald had no one to turn to anymore. He had pushed everyone away, alienated his friends, his family. He was alone now, just as she had been for so long. But now, he was about to face the consequences of his actions. Helen let herself in with the spare key he had once given her, another piece of trust he had destroyed. The silence inside the house was suffocating. She moved cautiously, her steps light but deliberate, as though she had already become part of the shadows. She could hear him in the kitchen, humming softly to himself, probably unaware that his world was about to come crashing down. She took a breath and stepped forward, her eyes narrowing. He was standing by the counter, his back to her. She didn't say a word. There was no need. Her actions would speak louder than anything she could say. With a swift, practiced motion, she reached into her bag and pulled out the small handgun she had brought along. The sound of the shot shattered the silence in the house like a thunderclap. Ronald didn't even have time to react. He crumpled to the ground in an instant, a pool of blood quickly spreading beneath him. Helen's heart didn't race. She didn't panic. She simply stood there, staring at the man who had once been her husband, the man who had destroyed everything she had ever believed in. And now, she had ended it. The gun felt strangely light in her hand as she took a slow step backward, her gaze never leaving him. She hadn't felt a rush of satisfaction, nor had she felt guilt. What she felt was finality. It was over. She turned and left the house without a second glance. The silence of the night welcomed her once again, and as she drove away, the adrenaline that had been coursing through her body began to ebb away. She didn't need to think about the consequences. She didn't need to think about the police, the investigation, or what would come next. All of that would come in time. But for now, she had done what she needed to do. The next morning, the police were already at Ronald's house. They had found his body, the gunshot wound at close range, the blood still fresh. It didn't take long for them to piece together the events leading up to his death. They knew about Helen, about the years of turmoil, about the divorce, the infidelity. They had been watching her for days, but there was no evidence of foul play at first glance. It seemed too neat, too perfect. But then came the discovery, the small envelope hidden under the kitchen sink. Inside, there were photos, documents, notes that Helen had left behind, pieces of her own narrative. It wasn't hard to see what had happened. The betrayal, the lies, the bitterness. It was all there. The trial began 2 months later. Helen sat in the courtroom, her face composed, her expression unreadable. The evidence against her was overwhelming, but there was something else, something deeper, that the prosecution couldn't grasp. They focused on her actions, on the murder, on the gunshot that had taken her husband's life. But what they missed, what no one could truly understand, was that Helen had been pushed to the edge. Her defense lawyer argued that she had acted in self-defense, that her life had been threatened, that her emotional state had been so shattered by Ronald's actions that she had snapped. It was a strategy, and one that Helen had agreed with. She didn't want to plead insanity. She didn't want to be painted as a victim. She had made her choice. She had chosen to end it, and now she would face the consequences. As the trial unfolded, Helen remained calm, though inside, her heart was a storm. Every word from the prosecution felt like a weight on her chest, every glance from the jury like a dagger. She knew what they were thinking, that she had killed her husband in cold blood, that she was a monster, that she deserved punishment. But they didn't know the whole story. They didn't know what it felt like to be trapped in a life of lies, to watch everything you had built crumble around you. But in the end, the jury found her guilty of manslaughter, not murder. They had considered the evidence, the years of emotional abuse, the years of betrayal, and had come to a conclusion that surprised everyone. It was a verdict that was both a victory and a loss for Helen. She had faced her demons. She had taken control of her life. But now, she would pay for it. As the gavel came down, Helen's heart pounded in her chest, but she stood firm. The weight of the prison sentence didn't feel as heavy as she had expected. Because for the first time in a long time, she knew that she had done the right thing. She had taken back her power. And in her mind, that was worth everything. The years that followed were long and arduous, but Helen found a new strength in herself. She was no longer a victim. She was a woman who had survived. And though she may have paid the price for her actions, she knew deep down that she would never again be the woman who had been broken by lies. She had rebuilt herself from the ashes. And no one, could take that away from her. Ronald's death had been the turning point in her life, but in the end, it wasn't just about revenge. It was about reclaiming her soul, her dignity, and her sense of self. And no matter where life took her from here, Helen knew that she had finally found peace. If you found this story gripping and want to hear more shocking true crime cases, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Hit that like button if you think justice was served, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Do you believe Helen's actions were justified, or was there another way out? We'd love to hear your theories.